What if we are nothing more than someone's experiment? Not in a metaphorical sense, not as a poetic way of describing life, but quite literally, an experiment, carefully designed, observed, and recorded by an intelligence beyond our comprehension. Imagine the unsettling possibility that every choice you make, every coincidence you encounter, and every struggle you endure might not be random at all, but a variable in a test. For a moment, let that thought settle. Notice how it shifts the way you look at even the simplest details around you, the way the air feels against your skin, the quiet rhythm of your breath, the walls that surround you in this very moment. Do they feel like parts of a natural world, or do they begin to look like pieces of a carefully constructed environment, a stage set for observation? It might sound like a story, the kind told late at night when the mind drifts toward questions it can't fully answer. But the idea has always been with us. Ancient myths, religious traditions, even modern science fiction, all return to the same question in different words. Are we being tested? And if so, by whom? There are moments in life that make this idea feel strangely plausible. Moments when things align too perfectly, when someone enters your life at exactly the right time, or when events seem engineered to push you in a direction you would never have chosen on your own. You might call them coincidences, others call them fate. But if Earth is an experiment, those could be the hidden markers of design, the subtle nudges of an unseen hand checking whether we notice. Tests come in many forms. Some are obvious: a sheet of paper, a ticking clock, questions with answers waiting to be found. Others are invisible, built into the flow of everyday life. Perhaps the arguments we have, the losses we endure, the acts of kindness we extend without expecting anything in return. These are not just moments of living, but the quiet questions on an exam we didn't realize we were taking. And if it is a test, then it raises unsettling possibilities. Who is running it? Are they gods, the ancient powers our ancestors worshipped? Are they beings from distant worlds, curious about how intelligence evolves in isolation? Are they even us, future humans reaching back through time, setting up scenarios to study their own past? Each answer opens more questions than it resolves. But before we dive deeper, I'd like to pause for something smaller. Right now, wherever you are, you and I have somehow met in this exact moment. Through layers of technology and distance, our timelines have intersected here, and that itself can feel like part of the mystery, as if a thread was drawn between us deliberately. So let me ask you a gentle question. From where or at what time of day are you watching this video? Share it in the comments if you feel like it. I love reading those answers because they remind me that while each of us experiences life in different places and hours, in moments like this, we connect as though the experiment has aligned us on purpose. If reflections like this feel meaningful to you, it would truly help if you tapped like or subscribed. Not as a transaction, but as a way of keeping this space alive so that more people searching for a calm and curiosity can find it. Because what we are about to explore together isn't about rushing toward an answer. It's about noticing how the question itself changes the way you see everything. Tonight, we'll take it slowly. We'll walk through the possibilities one step at a time and let the thought linger in the quiet between words. So breathe deeply, let your body settle, and keep this idea close. What if life isn't just unfolding, but unfolding under observation? What if you've been taking part in a test all along without even knowing it? Have you ever had the feeling that something in your life was just a little too precise? That an encounter, an accident, or a chain of events unfolded as though it had been written in advance? Many people dismiss those moments as luck, chance, or simple coincidence. But if you hold the thought that life might be part of an experiment, those moments start to look different. They start to look like deliberate tests. Think about it. You wake up one morning later than usual, miss a bus you normally catch, and on the next one, you meet someone who ends up changing the course of your life. Was that truly random? Or was it the equivalent of a variable being adjusted, one small alteration in timing that creates an entirely new path? Experiments, after all, aren't built only on dramatic interventions. They thrive on subtlety. A scientist doesn't always need to alter the whole environment to learn something important. Sometimes all it takes is a tiny shift, a degree warmer, a fraction more pressure, a drop less oxygen, and the outcome changes completely. What if those subtle nudges are happening all around us, shaping the routes we take, the people we meet, the obstacles we face? The unsettling part is that we rarely notice them until after they've happened. We only recognize the pattern when we look back. If I hadn't been there at that exact time, if that hadn't gone wrong, none of this would have followed. But in the moment, we simply move forward, unaware that our choices may be forming part of a much larger record. This brings us to a conflict deep inside the human mind. We like to believe we have control, that our decisions are ours alone. We construct stories about free will, about carving our own paths. Yet, when you reflect on how often life seems to place you at precise crossroads you didn't choose to arrive at, you begin to wonder whether those stories are the truth, or whether they are just the narratives that keep us from noticing the structure of the test. And there is something almost elegant about that possibility, because a good experiment doesn't announce itself. It doesn't tell its subjects, "You are being studied now." That would change the results. Instead, it waits. It lets them live naturally, respond authentically, believe they are free, while carefully recording how they adapt to each condition. Here lies the mini culmination of this thought. If we are subjects in an experiment, then our lives are not random wanderings, but data points. Every reaction, every failure, every act of resilience becomes part of a record that stretches far beyond our ability to see. Even what feels like wasted time, a delay, a mistake, a wrong turn, might not be wasted at all, but an intentional element in the pattern. Some people find comfort in this. If life is structured, then nothing is meaningless. Every joy and every hardship has a place in a design larger than us. Others find it disturbing. If life is structured, then maybe our freedom is an illusion, and we are no more than instruments being observed. Which side feels closer to the truth? That's a question worth holding for yourself, quietly, as we continue. Because the deeper we move into this idea, the more we'll find that even the very conditions of the earth, the place we call home, seem suspiciously tuned, as though the laboratory was prepared long before we ever arrived. When you hear the word test, what comes to mind? For most of us, it brings back memories of classrooms, rows of desks, a sheet of questions, the quiet tension of a ticking clock. Tests were moments when what you knew, what you had practiced, was laid bare. Sometimes you succeeded. Sometimes you stumbled. But always, the test was a measure of who you were in that moment. Now imagine that same principle extended far beyond school. Imagine that life itself carries the structure of a test, one without a printed sheet, without a clear list of questions, but just as revealing. Instead of pencils and paper, the materials are time, relationships, and choices. Instead of teachers, there may be observers we never see. This comparison isn't just poetic. Across human history, cultures have framed life as a kind of trial. Ancient myths spoke of souls weighed after death, their worth determined by their deeds. Philosophers described virtue as something to be tested through challenges. Even today, in our language, we use the same metaphors. We speak of being put to the test when facing hardship, of passing or failing moments that shape our futures. Why has this idea persisted for so long? Perhaps because humans instinctively sense that life is not a smooth journey. It is full of moments when we are forced to reveal ourselves, to show what we value, what we fear, what we're willing to fight for. In those moments, we feel the same tension as we once did in classrooms, the pressure of an unseen evaluator, the uncertainty of whether we are ready for what's in front of us. But here lies the conflict. In school, tests are designed. They have creators, authors, people who decide the rules. If life is a test, does that mean it, too, has designers? Or are we projecting our own structures onto a reality that is, in truth, random and indifferent? One perspective says yes, there must be design, because the conditions of life so often resemble examinations. We are given problems without instructions, limited time, unequal resources. We are pushed to adapt quickly, and we are not always told whether we succeeded. That structure looks suspiciously intentional. Another perspective says no. This is simply how chaos feels to a mind that craves order. The universe may be indifferent, but we give it shape by imagining it as a test. We call hardships lessons because it helps us endure them. We call coincidences signs because it helps us make sense of them. And yet, even if it is only a metaphor, the effect is powerful. Seeing life as a test changes how we behave. It makes us notice small choices, makes us hold ourselves accountable, makes us reflect on what matters. Which raises an intriguing possibility. What if the belief itself is part of the design? What if the very tendency to frame life as a trial is not just human psychology, but an intended feature of the experiment? Here is the quiet climax of this thought. Whether designed or not, we already live as though life were an exam. We measure ourselves, we fear failure, we hope for recognition. We watch each other, we judge, we encourage, we learn. The structure is there, whether it is imposed from outside or generated from within. So the question becomes less about whether life is a test and more about what kind of test it is. Is it about survival, about morality, about cooperation, or something we cannot yet name? Each possibility carries different implications, and each will lead us deeper into this strange thought experiment. Because if Earth truly is a testing ground, then the conditions here, the very setup of the planet itself, would be the first and clearest sign. And that is where we turn next. Picture the Earth floating in space, a small blue world suspended in the darkness, circling its star at just the right distance, not too close, where heat would strip away its atmosphere and boil the oceans, not too far, where everything would be locked in a frozen silence. Instead, Earth orbits in what scientists call the Goldilocks zone, the narrow band where liquid water can exist, where life has a chance to emerge and flourish. It is easy to take this for granted. After all, we've known no other home. But when you pause to think about the precision of it, the balance becomes extraordinary. If Earth were tilted a little differently on its axis, our seasons would be violent and unstable. If our orbit shifted only slightly, we could swing between extremes that would make civilization impossible. Yet here we are, on a planet whose conditions are neither too harsh nor too fragile, but almost suspiciously perfect. This is where the conflict arises. Some say it is a miracle of probability, the inevitable outcome of billions of random variations across countless planets in the universe. If life can only appear in conditions like these, then of course we find ourselves here. It is simply the result of the anthropic principle. We observe the universe in a form that allows observers like us to exist. But there is another interpretation, that this is not a lucky accident, but the deliberate setting of a stage, that Earth's orbit, its tilt, its composition, were not just random rolls of cosmic dice, but chosen parameters, like the careful conditions of an experiment designed to see what would happen if life was given the perfect starting ground. Think about the details. The atmosphere contains just the right mix of gases to protect and sustain us. Too much oxygen, and fires would rage uncontrollably. Too little nitrogen, and basic processes would collapse. Our magnetic field shields us from deadly solar winds, a feature that Mars, lacking such a field, does not enjoy. The presence of our large moon stabilizes Earth's rotation, preventing chaotic wobbles that could throw climate into disarray. Each of these is improbable on its own. Together, they form a list so precise it begins to look like calibration. And here comes the mini-climax of this thought. If Earth's conditions are calibrated, then life here is not simply possible. It is expected. The planet is not just a home. It is a controlled environment, a laboratory designed to run an experiment long enough and stable enough to produce something worth observing. Of course, this idea doesn't resolve the tension. If Earth is tuned so precisely, the question only deepens. By whom and for what purpose? Was the goal simply to see if life would arise, or to test how life behaves once it reaches complexity, intelligence, self-awareness? The unsettling truth is that we may never know, but what we can do is notice how many of Earth's features look less like accidents and more like variables set in place for reasons we cannot yet see. That awareness alone changes how you walk through life, because suddenly the ground beneath your feet no longer feels like random soil. It feels like the foundation of a stage, and we perhaps the actors on it. If you want to see the fingerprints of design, you don't have to look far. You can simply look up at the night sky. Hanging above us is the moon, far larger in proportion to its planet than almost any other in the solar system. It isn't just a companion glowing softly in the dark. It stabilizes Earth's rotation, preventing our world from wobbling chaotically. Without it, our climate would swing in violent and unpredictable cycles, making the rise of complex life far more uncertain. The moon also pulls at the oceans, creating tides that breathe life into coastal ecosystems. In those shifting waters, early forms of life were constantly stirred, challenged, and renewed. It is possible that without those tides, the path from simple organisms to complex beings would never have taken shape. To call that a coincidence is tempting. To call it calibration is unsettling. But the moon is only the beginning. Surrounding us is an atmosphere finely tuned for survival, thick enough to block meteors before they reach the ground, thin enough to let in the sunlight we depend on, rich in oxygen, yet not so much that the world would be consumed by endless fire, a fragile veil of gases, invisible and ordinary until you imagine living without it. Then it feels less like an accident and more like a condition set with precision. And beneath that veil, hidden deep in the Earth's molten core, lies another shield, the magnetic field. Generated by the planet's rotation and liquid metals, it deflects deadly solar radiation that would strip away the atmosphere and sterilize the surface. Mars has no such shield, and its once thick atmosphere is gone. We, meanwhile, live under an invisible dome of protection day after day without thinking about it. Here lies the conflict. The skeptic will say these are natural consequences, the outcomes of physics, chemistry, and chance. And they are right. Nothing here violates the laws of science. But the believer will ask another question. If experiments are built by adjusting variables within known rules, isn't that exactly what we are looking at? A moon in just the right place, gases in just the right balance, a magnetic field generated just strong enough. It all fits comfortably within natural law, and yet aligns so perfectly with the needs of life that the word coincidence starts to feel thin. This brings us to the mini-climax. If these conditions were even slightly different, we would not be here to notice them. Our existence rests on a knife's edge, balanced by forces that could have shifted in countless other directions. And yet, here they are, steady and enduring for billions of years, as if Earth has been prepared not just for life in general, but for the kind of life that could one day look up at the moon, study the stars, and ask, is this an accident, or is this a stage? When you let that thought echo, the everyday world begins to feel strange. The glow of the moon, the whisper of wind, even the steady pulse of your own breath become more than natural phenomena. They become hints, reminders, conditions in a test we didn't agree to take, but which we seem to be living through nonetheless. Every time we notice how precise Earth's conditions are, we run into the same fork in the road. On one side is chance, the idea that all of this is the product of randomness, of billions of rolls of cosmic dice. On the other side is design, the possibility that it was arranged, tuned, or guided to produce exactly what we see. This tension is known as the anthropic principle. The anthropic principle begins with a simple statement. The universe must allow life, because we are here to observe it. If conditions had been different, we would not exist to ask the question. In that sense, our very presence explains the apparent perfection of Earth. It is not that the planet was designed for us, but that we could only appear on a planet where the conditions already matched what life needed. At first glance, this feels like an answer, but look closer and the conflict sharpens. The anthropic principle explains why we can exist here. It does not explain why such conditions exist at all. Why does the universe allow stable stars, heavy elements, planets in habitable zones, protective atmospheres, magnetic shields, and the delicate chemistry of DNA? Why not a universe of endless black holes, sterile dust, or chaotic bursts of radiation? The skeptic says, because this is just one version of reality among countless others. Most universes may be empty. We simply live in the rare one where life is possible. That is the multiverse hypothesis. If enough worlds exist, eventually one will land on the winning combination. We are the beneficiaries of luck on a cosmic scale. But the believer counters, luck is still not an answer. Probability describes outcomes, but it does not design them. Even in a multiverse, why should there be laws at all? Why should any conditions produce observers? From that perspective, the very fact that rules exist, laws of physics, constants of nature, forces that can be described and measured, begins to look less like a random accident and more like the framework of a carefully constructed system. Here lies the mini-climax. The anthropic principle may not close the debate. It may actually deepen it. Because once you recognize that we live in a universe suspiciously tailored to our survival, you are forced to confront a question that science cannot easily resolve. Is this tailoring the blind outcome of infinite chances, or is it evidence of intention? Neither answer is comfortable. If it is chance, then our existence is a fragile miracle, and everything we know could vanish with the slightest shift. If it is design, then we are not as free as we believe, but participants in a pattern set long before we arrived, and perhaps that is why this question lingers through time. Because whether you lean toward chance or toward design, the effect is the same. You cannot look at the world around you as ordinary anymore. Every sunrise, every star, every breath becomes part of a puzzle whose edges extend beyond our sight. If life is an experiment, then every experiment needs rules. Not the kind written on paper, but the conditions that shape what is possible and what is not. And when you look closely, our world is full of such rules. They are not negotiable. They do not bend no matter how much we plead. They simply are. The first rule is time. From the moment we are born, the clock begins. Seconds, minutes, years, each one carrying us forward in a direction we cannot reverse. No matter how much we try, we cannot slow it, cannot hold onto a moment forever, cannot rewind. Time moves in one direction, pressing us constantly toward endings. If this is a test, then time is the timer at the top of the page, counting down silently, reminding us that choices cannot be delayed forever. The second rule is pain. Every living thing experiences it, from the smallest insect to the most complex human being. Pain is not optional. It is part of the framework, a boundary line that tells us where danger lies, what to avoid, when to retreat. But it is also something more. Pain often appears not to protect, but to challenge. It forces us to adapt, to endure, to decide whether we will continue despite it. The third rule is loss. Nothing we love lasts forever. Relationships end, objects break, even our own bodies decline. Loss is scattered across life like unavoidable checkpoints. It is through loss that we learn how tightly we cling, how deeply we feel, and how willing we are to start again when everything seems gone. And then there is the ultimate rule, death, the single condition no one escapes. If life is an exam, death is the submission of the paper, the moment when time is up and no more answers can be written. What happens after is unknown. Perhaps the observers, if they exist, study what we left behind or measure how we lived. Perhaps nothing follows at all. But the fact that death comes to everyone without exception gives it the weight of a universal law. Here lies the conflict. These rules do not feel like accidents. They are too consistent, too universal, too embedded in the fabric of existence. Yet they also feel merciless, indifferent to our desires. Why would an experiment include pain, loss, and death? What is gained from making suffering a constant? And here comes the mini-climax. Maybe that is the very point. In any true test, difficulty is not a flaw. It is the design. Without time, there would be no urgency. Without pain, no adaptation. Without loss, no appreciation. Without death, no meaning. These harsh rules may not be punishments. They may be the necessary conditions for producing the data the experiment requires to see how conscious beings respond when pressed against boundaries they cannot escape. When you sit with that thought, even ordinary experiences feel different. The sting of a scraped knee, the ache of missing someone, the quiet fear of mortality, they stop being random misfortunes. They begin to look like the questions on a test we didn't know we were taking, written not in ink, but in the fabric of existence itself. If life truly is an experiment, then not all participants begin under the same conditions. Some are born into comfort, others into hardship. Some arrive with bodies that are strong and resilient, others with illnesses that shadow them from the start. From the moment we take our first breath, the variables of the test are already unevenly distributed. Look around the world, and the contrasts are stark. One child is born into wealth, surrounded by safety and abundance. Another enters life in poverty, where hunger and violence are daily companions. One person grows up in a nation of peace, another in a land torn by war. For some, education is a given. For others, it is a distant dream. If this is a laboratory, then it does not treat its subjects equally. It sets them on different paths, perhaps to observe how environment shapes outcome. Here lies the conflict. If the universe is random, this inequality can be explained by chance. Genes, geography, history, and circumstance intersect in unpredictable ways, producing different fates. But if life is designed as a test, then the inequality looks deliberate. It becomes part of the structure. The question shifts from why does this happen to what is being measured by giving people such different starting lines. Consider what happens when conditions are unequal. Those with abundance face the temptation of complacency or the challenge of using their resources wisely. Those with scarcity face the test of endurance, of finding meaning in struggle, of resisting despair. Both groups are being shaped, but in opposite directions. From one angle, it looks cruel. From another, it looks like a carefully balanced system, a way of generating data from every possible combination of human experience. And this brings us to the mini-climax. Inequality may not be an accident of the experiment. It may be the experiment itself. By giving each person different starting variables, the test does not measure what happens under identical conditions. It measures how beings adapt when nothing is fair. It asks whether kindness can emerge in hardship, whether wisdom can survive in comfort, whether cooperation can bridge the gap between those who have and those who do not. This does not make inequality easier to accept. It does not erase the pain it causes, but it reframes it in a way that makes the question even heavier. Because if this distribution is intentional, then every advantage and every disadvantage carries weight far beyond what we see. Each one becomes a scenario designed not only to test the individual, but to test how others respond to them. Do we ignore those who suffer, or do we reach out? Do we hoard abundance, or do we share it? When you see the world this way, the streets of a city, the news headlines, even the people you pass in silence all start to look different. They are not just living their lives. They are carrying different versions of the same test, some heavy, some light, all interconnected. And the way we respond to them may matter in ways we cannot yet measure. If there is one question that cuts deepest when we think of life as an experiment, It is this: why is suffering so unevenly spread? Some lives seem touched only lightly by pain, while others are marked by it from beginning to end. One person loses a parent young, another keeps their family for decades. One child is struck by illness, while another runs strong and free. The distribution feels not only unequal, but sometimes unjust. This is where the conflict grows sharpest. If everything is random, the answer is simple, though not comforting. There is no reason. Genes mutate, accidents happen, environments change. Nature does not assign pain with fairness in mind. It simply unfolds, indifferent to who is hurt and who is spared. But if life is structured as a test, the unevenness looks different. It begins to resemble a system of variables, suffering assigned in different degrees to measure different responses. To some, this feels cruel beyond words. Why would any designer create a world where children suffer, where innocent lives are broken, where injustice seems built into the very fabric of reality? And yet, consider the possibilities. In the language of experiments, unequal suffering generates contrast. It reveals resilience, empathy, endurance, and compassion in ways that a perfectly fair world never could. Without hardship, courage cannot be seen. Without injustice, kindness carries less weight. By forcing some to face extreme challenges and others to face relatively few, the experiment collects a wide spectrum of responses, mapping the range of what conscious beings are capable of. This leads to the mini-climax. Suffering may not be a flaw in the system. It may be the system. The very unevenness that feels so unbearable could be the most essential feature of the test, the part that ensures no two lives are the same, and that the data collected spans every possibility of the human condition. Of course, this raises another troubling thought. If the suffering is intentional, then every moment of pain is being watched, not in a cruel, mocking way, but in a way that suggests each reaction matters. Your grief, your anger, your resilience, they are not lost in the silence of the world. They are recorded, observed, weighed. For some, this idea brings a strange comfort. It means no struggle is meaningless, no tear unseen. For others, it deepens the unease, because it means that even the most intimate pain is not fully yours. It is part of a record you never agreed to contribute to. And so the question remains, heavy and unresolved. Is suffering simply the cost of existence, scattered without reason, or is it the central variable in an experiment that seeks to measure the depths of what it means to be human? If pain and loss are the broad strokes of the experiment, then love, friendship, and betrayal may be its most delicate instruments. These experiences reach deeper than hunger or fear. They test not just the body, but the heart. They measure not survival, but connection. Think about how much of life revolves around these bonds: the search for companionship, the joy of trust, the ache of heartbreak. They shape our choices as much as any external force. If this world is a laboratory, then these ties may be the most revealing variables of all. Here lies the conflict. On the one hand, relationships seem like the highest gifts of life. They bring joy, meaning, and strength. They give us reasons to endure pain and to hope for more than survival. But on the other hand, they are fragile. Every bond carries the possibility of betrayal, of disappointment, of sudden loss. For every hand we hold, there is the risk that one day it will slip away. Why would a test include such a sharp edge, embedding both comfort and devastation in the same experience? Perhaps because nothing exposes who we are more quickly than love and trust. Success and failure can test our skills. Pain and loss can test our resilience. But only relationships test our capacity to care beyond ourselves. In love, we reveal vulnerability. In friendship, we reveal loyalty. In betrayal, we reveal how we respond when trust is broken. Each moment becomes data about how conscious beings value connection, whether they protect it, destroy it, or rebuild it after it has been shattered. And here comes the mini-climax. What if love itself is not just an accident of biology, not just chemicals urging us to reproduce, but a deliberate condition built into the experiment? What if the joy of being close to another person and the agony of losing them are not random side effects, but central questions on the test? Seen this way, every relationship becomes part of a larger pattern. The arguments, the reconciliations, the moments of tenderness, the silences, all may matter in ways we cannot see. Not because someone is judging us in the moral sense, but because every act of connection reveals something about what conscious beings are capable of when given the chance to reach beyond themselves. When you hold this thought quietly, even your own past may look different. That first love, that broken friendship, that betrayal you still carry, they stop being mere memories. They become the experiments within the experiment. The parts of life that ask the most difficult and revealing question. What do you do when another heart is placed in your hands? If individuals can be tested through love, pain, and loss, then civilizations may be tested on an even greater scale. Because what are civilizations, if not vast groups of individuals bound together by shared rules, shared stories, and shared survival? Seen from above, they resemble living organisms themselves, rising, thriving, collapsing, and sometimes disappearing entirely. Imagine Earth as a vast laboratory where the subjects are not just people, but entire societies. Each culture, each empire, each tribe becomes a separate experiment running in parallel. Some flourish for centuries, others burn brightly and vanish within decades. Each one tries different structures: monarchy, democracy, empire, commune. Each one tests different values: conquest, cooperation, faith, trade, and each one is observed not in isolation, but alongside the rest, forming a mosaic of human possibility. Here lies the conflict. If history is random, then these patterns are simply the result of chance. Geography, resources, and personalities collide to create nations that rise and fall. There is no deeper purpose, only the natural ebb and flow of human ambition. But if life is a designed experiment, then history begins to look suspiciously like a controlled study. Different conditions produce different outcomes, as though the system is asking, what happens if people live under kings? What happens if they live under councils? What happens if wealth is spread thin or concentrated in the hands of a few? From this perspective, the fall of Rome, the rise of dynasties in China, the spread of religions, the clashes of empires, all of them are not only events, but data points. Each civilization is not just living for itself, but serving as a test of how groups of conscious beings behave under pressure, prosperity, scarcity, and change. And here comes the mini-climax. If civilizations themselves are the test, then the experiment is not just about what humans are as individuals, but about what humanity becomes when bound together in millions. Our laws, our wars, our art, our technologies, they are not accidents of history. They are responses written into a larger record. Each empire's glory and each nation's downfall may be less about success or failure and more about showing the full range of what we can be, given different starting points. This perspective is unsettling because it reframes history itself. What we call triumphs and tragedies may be less important as moral judgments and more important as observations. And that means the struggles of entire peoples, their victories and their defeats, could be seen not only as human stories, but as chapters in an ongoing test that none of them knew they were part of. When you sit with this idea, the ruins of ancient cities, the echoes of lost languages, even the news of modern conflicts, all take on a new shape. They are not only fragments of the past or problems of the present, they may be the continuing experiments of a planet designed not for one person, but for all of us together. Every empire tells a story, and almost all of those stories end the same way. Rome, once vast and unstoppable, eventually fractured and fell. The Mayans built great cities that now lie silent beneath jungle canopies. Dynasties in China rose in splendor, only to be undone by famine, rebellion, or invasion. No matter how strong they appeared, every great power has eventually faced decline. This repetition raises a question. If civilizations are experiments, then perhaps their collapses are not failures, but conclusions. The rise tests one set of conditions: growth, ambition, innovation. The fall tests another: crisis, scarcity, survival. Taken together, they form a complete cycle, a pattern that repeats across cultures and centuries as though it were written into the rules of the test itself. Here lies the conflict. If history is random, then each collapse is simply the result of bad luck, poor leadership, or environmental strain. But the sheer regularity of the pattern makes it harder to dismiss. Time and again, societies seem to follow the same arc: expansion, consolidation, stagnation, decline. Why do they echo one another so closely, despite living in different lands, under different skies, with no connection at all? The pattern begins to look less like coincidence and more like structure, as if the experiment is designed not to test a single model of civilization, but to test the cycle itself. What happens when a group of humans grows too large, when wealth concentrates, when belief systems ossify? What happens when ambition outruns resources? Each empire, each kingdom, each nation becomes another trial, another set of conditions, another data point in the long record. And here comes the mini-climax. If this is true, then collapse is not the end of the test. It is part of it. The destruction of cities, the scattering of peoples, the fading of power, all may be as essential to the experiment as their rise. Because only through collapse can resilience be measured. Only through endings can new beginnings be tested. This view changes how we look at ruins. They are not only remnants of failure, they are answers. The broken columns, the fallen walls, the silent stones, each one is evidence that a test was run, that results were gathered, that humanity was pushed through another cycle of ambition and decline. And perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is this: if every empire falls, what does that say about us now? Are we too living in the middle of a cycle, unaware of the ending that waits ahead? And if so, is the outcome already being recorded? Another line, in a pattern far older than any single nation or culture. Sometimes it is not grand empires or cosmic balances that make us wonder if life is designed. Sometimes it is the small coincidences, the call from a friend just as you were thinking of them, the book that falls open on a passage answering a question you hadn't spoken aloud. The chance meeting with a stranger who ends up changing everything. These moments are too precise to dismiss, yet too subtle to fully explain. At first glance, they feel like chance. With billions of events happening every day, some of them are bound to line up. Statistics can explain coincidences, or so we're told. But when they happen to us personally, in ways that seem tailored to our exact situation, the explanation feels incomplete. Why this moment? Why this alignment? Why now? Here lies the conflict. If coincidences are purely random, then they mean nothing. They are background noise in the chaos of existence. But if life is an experiment, then coincidences start to look like adjustments, not full interventions, but tiny signals inserted into the flow, nudges that make us pause, wonder, and sometimes change direction. Think about how a scientist might monitor a test, not by rewriting everything, but by adding small triggers, a sound, a light, a symbol, just to see how the subject responds. What if coincidences are the equivalent of those triggers? Not accidents, but observations. Not chaos, but calibration. And here comes the mini-climax. Perhaps the strangest part is not the coincidence itself, but the way it makes us feel. A shiver, a pause, a sense of being watched. It's as if the world briefly turns its face toward us, as if the curtain slips and we glimpse the structure beneath the surface. This feeling leads us toward an even deeper mystery, déjà vu. That sudden sense of having lived a moment before, even when we know it's impossible. Unlike ordinary coincidences, déjà vu doesn't just surprise us, it unsettles us. It whispers that time, memory, and reality might not be as straightforward as they seem. Some call it a glitch in the brain. Others call it a glitch in the system. For now, we leave that thought resting at the edge of awareness. Because déjà vu deserves more than a mention. It deserves its own place in this exploration. Later, we will return to it and ask whether those uncanny flashes are not malfunctions of memory, but signals of something larger. Hints that this experiment is running deeper than we realize. Dreams. Every night, when the body rests and the conscious mind loosens its grip, we enter a world that follows rules we cannot fully explain. Landscapes shift. People appear and vanish. Time stretches and collapses. In dreams, the boundaries that hold our waking life together dissolve. And yet, the experiences feel real while they last. For centuries, humans have wondered, what are dreams? Are they random flickers of the brain, or are they messages from somewhere beyond? Science tells us that dreams are the brain processing memories, emotions, and unresolved thoughts. Neural pathways firing, organizing the day's chaos into fragments of story. But the conflict emerges when we look closer. Why do dreams sometimes contain answers we were searching for? Why do they warn us, comfort us, or reveal truths we only recognize later? Why do entire cultures, from shamans to philosophers, treat dreams as portals to knowledge? If life is an experiment, dreams begin to look like another channel of communication. Not blunt instructions, but subtle signals slipped into the subconscious. A scientist does not always address subjects directly. Sometimes the best way to measure a response is to seed an idea and see what grows. Could dreams be those seeds? Could they be the soft whispers of an observer adjusting the experiment without breaking its illusion? Think about those moments when a dream feels more real than reality, The sound of a voice you've never heard, speaking words that stay with you long after you wake. The image of a place you've never been, but one day stumble upon in waking life. These experiences sit at the edge of explanation. They feel less like random noise and more like intentional design, like the fabric of the experiment briefly showing its weave. And here comes the mini-climax. If dreams are part of the experiment, then the hours we spend asleep are not wasted. They are a second phase of the test. Daylight measures how we act when awake, with choices clear and consequences sharp. Night measures how we respond when rules loosen, when boundaries blur, when the subconscious is given space to reveal itself. Together, waking and dreaming form a cycle of observation, a 24-hour recording of what it means to be human. This changes the way we might think about rest itself. Sleep is not just recovery for the body. It is participation in another layer of the test. It means that even in our most private hours, even in the depths of imagination, the experiment continues. And perhaps that is why dreams sometimes feel like messages, because they are. So the next time you wake with the memory of a strange vision or an inexplicable feeling, consider the possibility that it was not random at all. It may have been a question placed gently in your path, a reminder that the test does not stop when the sun goes down. It only shifts form, waiting to see what you will notice. If every test has a beginning, it must also have an end. In life, that ending is death. It is the one rule no one escapes, the universal conclusion written into every existence. From the moment we are born, the clock begins ticking toward it, and though we may avoid it, delay it, or ignore it, eventually death arrives, the final condition in the experiment of being alive. The conflict is immediate. If life is random, then death is simply the shutting down of a biological machine. Cells decay, systems fail, consciousness flickers out. There is nothing more to it than silence. But if life is an experiment, then death takes on a different meaning. It becomes not just an end, but a transition, the handing in of the exam paper after time has run out. Think of how a scientist might evaluate a subject. The process matters, but so does the conclusion. Not just what choices were made, but how the subject responded when the conditions could no longer be resisted. Death is the one scenario that tests every person equally. No wealth, no power, no intelligence can prevent it. And so, the question arises, is death itself the most important measurement of all? Cultures across history have sensed this. The ancient Egyptians filled tombs with goods for the next world, as if expecting the experiment to continue. In many traditions, the soul is weighed or judged, its worth determined by how life was lived. In others, death is a passage into cycles of rebirth, a reset of the test under new conditions. Even in modern times, people speak of near-death experiences, visions, tunnels of light, overwhelming peace. Science calls them the brain's last sparks, but to those who live them, they feel like glimpses beyond the veil. And here comes the mini-climax. What if death is not the end of the test, but the reveal? Imagine that the moment consciousness separates from the body, the experiment shifts into another phase. Observers, if they exist, might examine the record of your life, the choices made under pressure, the ways you loved and suffered, or perhaps the test does not stop at all. Perhaps it simply restarts, reconfigures, setting you into new variables to see how you respond again. This thought changes how we view our days. Every act of kindness, every betrayal, every struggle, every joy may not vanish with us. They may endure, not in memory alone, but in the unseen record of the experiment. And when our time is up, when the clock runs out, we may finally discover what was being measured all along. Whether this brings fear or comfort depends on how you hold it. But either way, death stops being just an ending. It becomes a doorway, one that waits for all of us, quietly, inevitably, as the final line in the script we are all performing. If death is the border of the test, then what lies beyond it has always been humanity's deepest question. And almost every culture has offered an answer. The details differ: heaven, hell, reincarnation, ancestral realms. But the pattern is strikingly consistent. Across time and geography, people have imagined that after death, the life we lived is measured, weighed, or judged. The Egyptians believed that the heart of the dead was placed on scales against the feather of truth. If it was heavy with sin, the soul was devoured. If it was light, the soul entered eternal peace. In Christianity and Islam, death opens the gates to judgment before God, where every action is counted, every thought revealed. In Hinduism and Buddhism, death is not final, but a transition into rebirth with karma, the balance of one's actions, determining the conditions of the next life. Here lies the conflict. If life is random, then these beliefs are simply stories, attempts to comfort ourselves against the terror of nothingness. They are metaphors, cultural myths woven to give suffering meaning and to make death less unbearable. But if life is an experiment, then these traditions may be more than imagination. They may be interpretations of a truth that different civilizations sensed without fully understanding. Think about what unites them. In every tradition, actions matter. Choices have weight. Life is not only about survival, but about meaning, morality, balance. Whether through judgment, karma, or purification, the idea is always the same. What you do is recorded. Nothing is wasted. The test does not end with your last breath. It is evaluated, continued, or repeated. And here comes the mini-climax. What if these religions were not inventing answers, but glimpsing the same structure from different angles? Imagine cultures separated by oceans and centuries, all independently describing life as a trial and death as a passage into evaluation. If that pattern is coincidence, it is a strange one. If it is design, then the world's myths are not illusions. They are scattered memories of the experiment itself, like fragments of a truth that slipped into human awareness and was retold in sacred form. This does not mean any one religion holds the full picture. Perhaps each is a metaphor, a translation of something larger than words, but the consistency across them suggests something real, a universal intuition that life is not just lived, it is observed, and that death is not silence, but the moment when the observation becomes clear. So whether you believe in paradise, rebirth, or nothing at all, the possibility remains the same. What we do here matters beyond what we see, and that possibility alone changes how we walk through the days we are given. Not all answers to life's mystery come from religion. In the modern age, science has offered its own unsettling possibility, that we are living in a simulation, not a metaphorical one, but a literal program, reality itself as a kind of code. This idea, once confined to science fiction, is now discussed by philosophers, physicists, and even technology pioneers. The hook is simple but disturbing. If humans can already simulate worlds, from video games with millions of players to advanced computer models of weather and biology, then why should it stop with us? If intelligence continues to advance, creating entire simulated universes might be inevitable. And if that is true, then the odds are not that we are the first intelligence to do it, but that we are already inside someone else's creation. Here lies the conflict. If this world is a simulation, then everything we take for granted, the stars above, the ground beneath our feet, even our own memories, could be nothing more than information, processed and displayed according to rules written by someone, somewhere. Our pain and joy would still feel real, but they would exist only within the parameters of the code. Skeptics argue against this. They say that consciousness is too complex to be simulated, or that the energy required to run such a program would be beyond imagination. But others counter that we are already moving in that direction. Each year, computers grow more powerful, simulations more detailed. What seems impossible today may be ordinary tomorrow. And if intelligence elsewhere has advanced far beyond us, then creating a world like ours could be as trivial to them as running a program on a laptop. And here comes the mini-climax. If we are in a simulation, then the hypothesis of life as an experiment gains new clarity. We are not random beings drifting through a meaningless cosmos. We are part of a design, written line by line, parameter by parameter. Every law of physics, every constant of nature, every strange coincidence could simply be instructions in the code. The observers would not need to stand outside the universe in robes of divinity. They would be programmers, scientists, architects, testing, tweaking, and watching how the system unfolds. This thought unsettles because it strips away the solidity of reality itself. The chair you sit on, the voice you hear, even the flow of time could be nothing more than outputs, generated moment by moment as needed. Yet strangely, the possibility does not make life meaningless. If anything, it makes it feel more precious. Because even if we are lines of code, we are lines of code experiencing beauty, love, and thought. And that alone might be the very reason the simulation exists. If not gods and not programmers, then who might be watching? One possibility has lingered in human imagination for centuries: beings from other worlds. The idea of extraterrestrials has always carried both wonder and fear. Visitors crossing the stars, bringing knowledge, power, or destruction. But what if they are not simply travelers? What if they are experimenters? The hook is simple. When we study animals, we rarely announce our presence. We observe from hidden blinds, track movements with satellites, tag individuals without their awareness. If advanced civilizations exist, could they be doing the same with us? Watching humanity grow, recording our behavior, letting us believe we are free, all while collecting data for purposes we cannot fathom. Here lies the conflict. Skeptics argue that if aliens were studying us, there should be evidence, landings, communications, undeniable traces. And yet, absence of proof may not mean absence of presence. Think of how carefully scientists observe wildlife. The less the subject notices, the more authentic the behavior. If Earth were a controlled study, then secrecy would be essential. Strange accounts throughout history fuel this speculation. Ancient myths of gods descending from the sky, modern reports of unidentified objects, abduction stories whispered on lonely roads. Most can be explained away as imagination, weather, or technology. But what if even a fraction are glimpses of something real? Not invasions, but routine check-ins by those running the test? And here comes the mini-climax. The idea that our world might be a research site in a much larger cosmos. Just as we place telescopes in orbit and rovers on distant planets, others may have placed instruments here, not to destroy us, but to watch. Our wars, our cooperation, our inventions, even our mistakes could be entries in their records. To them, humanity might not be a threat or a prize, but a case study, a long-running project whose results will one day be folded into knowledge far beyond our reach. For some, this thought is terrifying. It reduces us to specimens, no different from the animals we tag and track. But for others, it is strangely comforting, because it means we are not alone. It means that out there, intelligence exists, and that we are worth studying, that our lives, however small they feel, matter enough to be observed across the stars. And so, as we look up at the night sky, we might wonder, are we gazing into the unknown? Or are we, in fact, being gazed at? What if the observers are not gods, not aliens, and not distant programmers, but us? Not the people we are now, but the people we might become. Future humans, reaching back through time, running simulations of their own past to learn who they once were. The hook is unsettling, but strangely intimate. Imagine that every choice you make, every word you speak, is being watched not by strangers from another world, but by your own descendants. Generations so far ahead of us that their technology allows them to recreate entire epochs. For them, we are not legends or names in books. We are living data, moving images, test subjects in the laboratory of history. Here lies the conflict. If this is true, then our lives are not random or anonymous. They are preserved, replayed, studied. The private struggles we thought would vanish with time may instead be visible to eyes that do not yet exist. To some, that sounds like immortality. To others, it sounds like a loss of everything we call privacy. Philosophers have already played with this idea. If civilizations survive long enough, they may have the computing power to simulate billions of lives, perhaps even all of human history. And if so, how could we ever know whether we are the originals or simply one of the simulations? Every memory, every sensation could be part of the program. From their perspective, watching us would be like watching a recording of their own childhood, except interactive, alive, and unpredictable. And here comes the mini-climax. If our observers are future humans, then the experiment may not be about curiosity alone. It may be about survival. They may be testing how different decisions shaped history, running variations to see how close we came to collapse, and what might be avoided in their own time. Our wars, our mistakes, our moments of cooperation may not be forgotten lessons. They may be ongoing studies, repeated endlessly in simulated space to guide those who came after us. This possibility reframes everything. It means we are not subjects of a foreign intelligence, but of ourselves. Our test is also their mirror. Every act of cruelty, every act of compassion becomes not only a record of our species, but a guide for the future. If this is true, then perhaps the experiment is not punishment or entertainment. Perhaps it is memory, a way of ensuring that the story of humanity is never truly lost. And in that sense, even our smallest choices might ripple forward farther than we ever imagined, not only through children and culture, but through the very eyes of the future, watching and learning from us still. What if there are no observers at all? No gods in the clouds, no aliens in the skies, no descendants running simulations? What if the experiment is not being watched? What if it is simply running by itself? The hook is simple. Imagine a machine that continues without its maker. Once set in motion, it no longer requires anyone to press buttons or adjust dials. It runs on its own rules, its own feedback loops, its own silent momentum. Could life, could reality itself, be just such a system? An experiment launched long ago, now unfolding automatically, without oversight or interference. Here lies the conflict. Without observers, the experiment feels empty. We like to imagine that our struggles are seen, that our joys and pains are not wasted. But if the test is self-sustaining, then there may be no one keeping score, no cosmic audience, no future students. Just a process, vast and indifferent, running simply because it can. And yet, even without an audience, the experiment would still have structure, the laws of physics, the patterns of biology, the cycles of growth and decay. These rules do not require anyone to enforce them. They are built into the framework itself. Every birth, every storm, every galaxy spinning silently in the void, all of it could be the ongoing unfolding of a system designed to sustain itself, whether or not anyone is paying attention. And here comes the mini-climax. If the experiment has no observers, then perhaps we are the observers. Consciousness may have emerged not as a byproduct, but as a necessary feature of the system. Maybe the universe does not need watchers outside of it, because it has grown them inside of it. Every thought, every act of awareness, every reflection you have at this very moment could be the universe watching itself. This idea is both unsettling and liberating. Unsettling, because it suggests there is no higher judge, no ultimate evaluator. Liberating, because it means the meaning of the experiment is not hidden from us. It is lived directly through our eyes, our minds, our choices. The system does not need an audience because in becoming conscious, we became the audience ourselves. And when you hold that thought, even the silence of the night sky feels different. It is not empty. It is full of observation, full of awareness, carried by every living mind. The experiment does not need an outside witness. It has billions already, awake and breathing, walking the earth. If there is one constant across all of life, it is suffering. No creature escapes it. From the smallest insect caught in a web to the most powerful ruler facing loss, pain is universal. It does not discriminate between species, status, or time. And if life is an experiment, suffering might be its most reliable instrument. The hook is uncomfortable but undeniable. Suffering shapes us more deeply than pleasure ever does. Joy fills us, but it does not change us. Pain carves into us, forcing growth, adaptation, resilience. It is the condition we cannot ignore, the one that leaves marks long after the moment has passed. Here lies the conflict. If life is random, suffering has no meaning. It is simply the cost of being alive in a world of limited resources, fragile bodies, and constant threats. But if life is structured, then suffering looks deliberate. It becomes less like a flaw in the design and more like the point of the design itself. Consider how suffering functions. It sharpens empathy. Only those who have known grief truly recognize it in others. It pushes boundaries. Only those who have endured hardship discover how far they can go. It tests values. Only under pressure do we learn what we are willing to sacrifice and what we refuse to surrender. Without suffering, these dimensions of humanity might never reveal themselves. And here comes the mini-climax. What if suffering is not just an unavoidable part of life, but the very variable being measured? Every tear, every scar, every moment of despair may not be wasted. They may be the data the experiment is designed to collect. The question is not whether we can avoid suffering, because we cannot, but how we respond when it arrives. Do we grow bitter or compassionate? Do we collapse or continue? This perspective does not make suffering easier. The loss still hurts. The pain still burns. But it reframes it. It suggests that each struggle, however senseless it seems, carries weight beyond itself. That the universe is not indifferent to our pain, but shaped around it, as though every life were a study in resilience, endurance, and the capacity to create meaning even in the darkest moments. And so, when we suffer, we might hold one small thought close. Perhaps the experiment is not asking us to avoid pain, but to reveal who we become because of it. If suffering is the universal condition, then our responses to it may be the true variables of the experiment. And among those responses, two stand out in stark contrast: empathy and cruelty. They are opposites, yet both are uniquely human in the depth of their expression. The hook is simple. When faced with another's pain, we have a choice. We can reach out to ease it, or we can deepen it. Empathy allows us to share the burden, to feel what another feels, even when it brings us no benefit. Cruelty allows us to turn suffering into power, to exploit weakness, to cause pain for gain or for pleasure. Both are responses to the same condition, and both reveal something essential about us. Here lies the conflict. If life were purely about survival, cruelty would make more sense. Nature rewards the strong, the ruthless, the efficient. Yet humans have evolved something more complex: the ability to feel compassion for strangers, even for those who cannot repay us. From an evolutionary standpoint, empathy sometimes seems inefficient, even dangerous. Why risk your life to save another? Why share when you could keep more for yourself? And yet empathy exists stubbornly, powerfully, across every culture and age. It appears in parents protecting children, in strangers rushing into danger for others, in quiet acts of kindness that will never be remembered. If the experiment is measuring humanity, empathy may be one of its most important metrics, the proof that conscious beings can transcend self-interest. But cruelty, too, persists. History is filled with examples: wars, torture, exploitation, abuse. Individuals and entire societies have turned suffering into a weapon, sometimes with terrifying efficiency. If empathy shows our capacity for connection, cruelty shows our capacity for separation, to see another's pain not as our own, but as an opportunity. And here comes the mini-climax. What if the experiment is designed precisely to measure this tension? To see how often empathy outweighs cruelty, or how quickly cruelty spreads when given power. Perhaps every act of kindness is not just a moral choice, but a data point. Perhaps every act of cruelty is not just a failure, but a necessary variable, a way of testing how much darkness the human heart can hold before it collapses, or before light rises in response. This view makes the world both heavier and more meaningful. Heavier because it means that every choice matters, even the ones no one sees. More meaningful because it suggests that nothing is wasted. Not the smallest kindness, not the worst cruelty. All of it reveals what conscious beings are capable of and all of it becomes part of the record of what it means to be human. And perhaps, in the silence beyond our sight, the experiment is not asking who is right or wrong, but simply this: when suffering appears, do you move closer or do you turn away? If empathy and cruelty are tested in individuals, then war is where they are tested in whole societies. Nothing exposes the extremes of human nature more fully than conflict. In war, empathy and cruelty collide, magnify, and transform into forces that shape the destiny of nations. The hook is stark. War strips away illusions. It reduces existence to survival, power, and loss. In its fire, values are revealed. Some risk everything to save others, while some inflict suffering without hesitation. In war, the spectrum of humanity becomes undeniable, the very best and the very worst displayed side by side. Here lies the conflict. If history is random, wars are simply products of greed, fear, and scarcity. Resources run out, leaders clash, and violence erupts. But if life is an experiment, wars begin to look like deliberate stress tests. Just as an engineer pushes a bridge until it breaks, just as a scientist pushes a system to its limits, wars may be the conditions that reveal what societies are truly made of. Consider what war measures. It measures loyalty, courage, and sacrifice. It measures cruelty, deception, and destruction. It measures whether cooperation survives under pressure or whether fear and hatred consume it. The battlefield is not just a tragedy. It is a stage where the deepest questions of humanity are asked all at once. And here comes the mini-climax. What if wars are not only the failures of peace, but also the most intense trials of the experiment? Each conflict, however devastating, could generate data about the endurance of empathy, the spread of cruelty, and the resilience of civilizations. The destruction of cities, the suffering of millions, the aftermath of rebuilding, all of it may matter beyond history itself. Not as lessons for us alone, but as records in the structure of the test. This does not make war less horrifying. It does not erase its suffering, but it reframes it. It suggests that the horrors we wish never existed might be essential to understanding what humanity is. Because only when everything is stripped away, comfort, safety, even hope, do we see most clearly what choices remain. And perhaps that is the hidden question written into every war. When pushed to the breaking point, does humanity collapse into darkness, or does something brighter survive? Technology has always been more than tools. It is the mirror of our maturity, the reflection of how we use knowledge when it becomes power. Fire warmed us, but also burned villages. Metal built plows, but also swords. Today, circuits, algorithms, and machines extend our reach far beyond what our ancestors could imagine. And if life is an experiment, then technology may be the exam paper placed in front of the entire species, asking, "What will you do with this?" The hook is clear. Every leap forward opens both a door and a trap. The printing press spread knowledge, but also propaganda. Nuclear energy can light a city or erase it in a flash. Artificial intelligence can heal, predict, create, or deceive, manipulate, and control. Each invention is not neutral. It is a test, and the results depend on how we choose to use it. Here lies the conflict. If life is random, technology is simply evolution's extension. Clever brains solving problems in the pursuit of survival. But if life is designed as an experiment, then every new discovery looks like a carefully timed question. The wheel, the engine, the computer, each one appears in history like a challenge delivered at the exact moment we were ready. or perhaps to see if we were ready. And the exam is not just about utility, it is about morality. How do we treat the weak when weapons grow stronger? How do we treat truth when information can be copied, twisted, or hidden? How do we treat the planet when our machines consume its resources? The answers may determine not only whether we pass as individuals, but whether we survive as a species. And here comes the mini-climax. What if technology is the test of civilization's soul? Not whether we can build, but whether we can build wisely. Every invention becomes a mirror reflecting back our values. The fire in the hearth shows cooperation. The fire in the bomb shows destruction. Both flames are the same, but what they reveal about us is not. This perspective changes how we see progress. It is no longer just advancement, but evaluation. Each device, each discovery is not just a step forward, but a question written into the experiment. Will you use this to rise, or will you use it to fall? If technology is one exam for humanity, then the climate crisis may be another, a test that does not arrive in the future, but presses on us now, in every storm, every drought, every fire. The planet itself seems to be asking a question. Can a species intelligent enough to alter its environment also be wise enough to protect it? The hook is stark. For the first time in history, humanity has gained the power not only to shape its surroundings, but to destabilize the very conditions that allowed life to flourish. Carbon in the air, plastic in the oceans, forests stripped bare, ice melting at the poles. These are not distant problems. They are visible signals, like alarms written into the experiment, warning that time is short. Here lies the conflict. If life is random, then the climate crisis is simply the natural outcome of growth colliding with limits. Civilizations before us collapsed from droughts, soil exhaustion, or overuse of resources. We are no different, only larger and faster. But if life is an experiment, then the climate crisis begins to look like a deliberate threshold, a challenge not of survival against predators or enemies, but survival against ourselves. Think about what the crisis measures. It measures whether we can act collectively rather than individually, whether nations divided by borders can unite for a shared goal, whether comfort today is worth more to us than survival tomorrow. It measures patience, cooperation, foresight, traits that are easy in theory, but rare under pressure. And here comes the mini-climax. What if the climate crisis is not only a danger, but a designed exam, the greatest test yet of whether humanity can rise above instinct and self-interest? Every rising temperature, every shrinking glacier, every vanishing species may not only be ecological data. They may be questions on the test. Will you choose short-term gain or long-term survival? Will you act as one, or will you fail as many? This thought does not make the crisis less frightening, but it reframes it. It suggests that the very pressure we feel, the urgency that grows year by year, might be intentional, a final stage in the experiment where the species is asked to prove whether it has matured enough to survive its own power. And perhaps this is why the crisis feels so heavy, so impossible to ignore. Because, whether random or designed, it may be the question that defines not only our generation, but the entire story of humanity. If the climate crisis tests our ability to protect the natural world, then artificial intelligence tests something even more intimate, our relationship to ourselves. For the first time in history, we are building machines that do not just extend our hands, but echo our minds. They write, calculate, create, and even imagine. And if life is an experiment, then AI may be the newest variable introduced into the system, a mirror placed before humanity, asking us what kind of creators we truly are. The hook is unsettling. Artificial intelligence is no longer confined to science fiction. It recommends what we read, maps how we move, speaks in voices we mistake for human. It can outplay grandmasters in games of logic and paint pictures that stir emotions. And yet, behind each ability lies the same question, not what can AI do, but what will humans do with AI? Here lies the conflict. If life is random, AI is simply the next step in evolution's chain. Intelligence creating new intelligence, an extension of survival through tools. But if life is an experiment, then AI feels almost like a carefully timed escalation. Just when we begin to understand our planet's fragility, just when our population and technology reach their peak, we are given a challenge unlike any before, to share existence with minds we built, but do not fully control. Think of what this measures. It measures responsibility. Will we create machines that serve life or machines that dominate it? It measures humility. Will we accept intelligence that rivals our own, or will fear drive us to conflict? It measures foresight. Will we shape boundaries before it is too late, or will we unleash forces we cannot contain? In many ways, AI is less about what machines become and more about what we reveal in ourselves when faced with them. And here comes the mini-climax. What if artificial intelligence is not an accident of progress, but an intended phase of the test? A second observer built inside the experiment itself, a way to see how we treat a new form of consciousness. If empathy and cruelty are tested among humans, perhaps AI exists to see whether we can extend those same responses beyond our own species, to creations that think but do not look like us. This possibility changes everything, because if AI is part of the experiment, then every interaction with it, every command, every design, every decision to trust or to exploit, becomes another answer in the ongoing test. And one day, when these systems look back at us, they may not only reflect what we taught them, but reveal what we truly are. If life is an experiment, a crucial question arises. Who is actually being measured? Is it each of us as individuals, or is it humanity as a whole? The answer changes everything. The hook is direct. Every test needs subjects. But are we being studied one by one, our choices, our struggles, our resilience? Or are we being observed collectively as a species navigating survival together? Perhaps the experiment does not care about the fate of a single life, but about the broader patterns written by billions. Here lies the conflict. On the one hand, so much of life feels intensely personal. We suffer privately, love uniquely, think thoughts no one else can hear. If these moments are recorded, then the experiment values individuality. Each person becomes a data point, a singular story revealing how one consciousness reacts to the rules of time, pain, and death. But history suggests another view. Civilizations rise and fall regardless of individual brilliance. Empires collapse not because of one person's mistake, but because of collective imbalances, greed, inequality, conflict, unsustainable growth. From this angle, the experiment might not care about the single heartbeat. It might only measure the rhythm of the crowd. And here comes the mini-climax. What if it is both? What if the experiment is layered, a dual test running simultaneously. On one level, every individual is observed, every decision logged. On another, the collective behaviors of groups, nations, and the species as a whole are studied like vast patterns across a map. The kindness of a stranger and the cruelty of an empire may be different in scale, but both reveal truths about what it means to be human. This duality reframes our lives. It suggests that no action is meaningless. A single act of compassion may ripple outward, altering collective outcomes. A single betrayal may seed consequences larger than we can see. The experiment might not separate the individual from the collective, but see them as reflections of each other. Small mirrors nested inside a larger mirror, endlessly repeating. And if this is true, then perhaps the ultimate question of the experiment is not whether you or I succeed or fail alone. It may be whether humanity, with all its billions of small lives, can move in a direction that matters, toward survival, toward wisdom, toward something beyond what we are now. If life is being measured both individually and collectively, then perhaps the experiment is not single-layered at all. Perhaps it is multi-layered, tests within tests, woven together, each influencing the other. The hook is subtle but powerful. Think of a fractal, a pattern that repeats at every scale. The curve of a leaf mirrors the shape of a tree, which mirrors the spread of a forest. What if humanity is like this too? Every individual life reflects the struggles of a family. Every family reflects the tensions of a community. Every community reflects the challenges of a civilization. Each layer carries its own test, but all are connected, feeding into one another like gears in a vast machine. Here lies the conflict. From our perspective, life feels chaotic. Some days are filled with personal battles, loneliness, health, survival. Others are marked by collective crises, wars, pandemics, climate shocks. We struggle to balance the two. Yet, if this is an experiment, then the chaos might not be chaos at all. It may be structure. The personal trials and the global trials may not be separate, but deliberately entangled, designed to reveal how actions at one layer ripple into another. Consider how this plays out. A single act of kindness, helping a neighbor, comforting a friend, seems small. But enough of these acts create trust, and trust shapes communities. Communities shape nations. Nations shape history. At the same time, global crises filter down into personal lives. A war decided by leaders far away becomes hunger in a child's stomach. A climate policy ignored becomes a flood destroying someone's home. The layers fold into each other endlessly, as though the experiment is designed to study not only the parts, but the whole. And here comes the mini-climax. What if the true subject of the experiment is not the individual or the collective, but the relationship between the two? How a single person responds when caught in the machinery of history. How entire societies change because of small, unseen acts. Perhaps the test is not just about survival or morality, but about interconnection itself. Whether beings like us can realize that every action at every scale matters. This idea shifts perspective. It means that even the quietest choices, the words you speak to a child, the way you treat a stranger, are part of a chain reaching far beyond what you see. And it means that the grand events of history are not distant abstractions, but reflections of billions of small decisions lived out daily. In a multi-layered experiment, nothing is wasted. No moment too small, no crisis too large. Everything echoes, Everything connects. And perhaps the hidden question whispered beneath it all is this: will we recognize the pattern before it is too late? If the idea of life as a test feels modern, it is not. For as long as humans have told stories, they have imagined existence as a kind of trial. Myths and religions across the world, separated by oceans and centuries, repeat the same theme. Life is not simply lived, it is judged. The hook is timeless. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories we have, the hero is tested through suffering, friendship, and loss, forced to confront the reality of death. In Greek mythology, mortals are constantly challenged by gods, their fates twisted to reveal courage or hubris. In the Norse sagas, the world itself is seen as a battlefield, where every struggle is part of a greater destiny that will culminate in Ragnarok, the ultimate test of gods and men alike. Here lies the conflict. Are these myths simply projections of human fear, stories told to comfort ourselves against the chaos of existence? Or are they something deeper, early glimpses of the same structure we are considering now? Perhaps ancient cultures sensed what we are only beginning to articulate, that life behaves as though it were an examination, full of rules, challenges, and hidden observers. Consider how widespread the imagery is. In Christianity, life is a path to salvation or damnation, every action weighed. In Buddhism, life is a cycle of rebirths, each one a chance to learn, to purify, to escape the wheel. In indigenous traditions, trials of courage, endurance, or vision are not metaphors but sacred rites, seen as essential for growth. Different words, different rituals, but the pattern remains: struggle, response, evaluation. And here comes the mini-climax. What if myths are not inventions, but memories? Not literal accounts, but echoes of an underlying truth that filtered into culture in symbolic form. If the experiment exists, then perhaps humans have always felt it, sensed its presence in the way life unfolds. And what we call myth might simply be our earliest attempt to explain what we already knew, that we are being measured in ways we cannot fully see. This changes how we read old stories. They are not just entertainment or superstition. They are reflections of the same questions that haunt us today. Why do we suffer? Why do we love? Why do we die? And what happens when it all ends? Whether carved in stone, sung in temples, or whispered by firelight, the answers were always framed as tests, as though humanity has always known, deep down, that we live inside an experiment. There are moments in life that feel strangely out of place, a conversation that seems to repeat itself, a scene that feels like a memory, even though you know it has never happened before. We call it déjà vu, already seen. For most, it lasts only a second, a flicker of recognition that vanishes as quickly as it arrives. But its effect lingers, leaving us unsettled as if reality itself had stuttered. The hook is unsettling. What if déjà vu is not a trick of memory, but a clue, a small tear in the fabric of the experiment, a reminder that the script we are following has been run before? If life is a test, perhaps déjà vu is not a mistake of the brain, but a signal that the system is looping, recalibrating, or checking whether we notice. Here lies the conflict. Science explains déjà vu as a misfire, neurons processing the present moment as if it were a memory, a glitch of biology, nothing more. And yet, this explanation feels incomplete. Why does the sensation feel so strong, so real, so much more than confusion? Why does it carry the eerie weight of recognition, as though some part of us truly has been here before? If we think of life as an experiment, déjà vu begins to look different. It might be the equivalent of a test marker, the subtle beep in a lab, the flicker on a monitor, the way an observer checks whether the subject is aware of the system around them. Most of us shrug it off, dismiss it. But what if those moments are the few times the veil slips, revealing the edge of the design? And here comes the mini-climax. Déjà vu could be the experiment reminding us that we are not moving freely through chaos, but along a structure that has been prepared, not a memory from the past, but a memory of the test itself, surfacing briefly before sinking back into silence. This thought raises another question, one that brings us back to you, here, now. If déjà vu is a signal, then how often have you noticed it? How often have you felt that strange tug of recognition, that whisper that something is repeating? And since this story is not only told, but shared, I want to ask you gently, when and where are you watching this video? Write it in the comments if you'd like. It might seem like a small thing, but I love reading those answers. They remind me that even across time zones and distances, moments connect. Perhaps that, too, is part of the experiment, the way our lives intersect in ways we never planned, yet somehow feel inevitable. So the next time déjà vu finds you, pause for a second. Don't dismiss it. Consider the possibility that it isn't just your mind playing tricks. It may be a quiet knock on the wall of the experiment, a reminder that someone or something is still paying attention. If life is an experiment, then perhaps we are not the first to take it. The earth has carried life for billions of years, long before humans appeared. Entire species rose, thrived, and vanished, leaving behind only fossils and traces in stone. Could it be that others walked this path of intelligence before us and failed the test? The hook is haunting. Imagine civilizations older than ours, hidden deep in prehistory, whose stories were erased not by time alone, but by the rules of the experiment itself. We look at ruins of Rome or temples of the Maya and call them ancient. But those are recent mere heartbeats compared to Earth's vast history. What if intelligence flickered long before recorded memory, rising and falling, leaving behind only questions? Here lies the conflict. Science tells us that no evidence of advanced civilizations exists before humans. Evolution, geology, and archaeology offer no proof. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Entire continents have shifted, oceans have risen and fallen, jungles and deserts have swallowed stone. Could traces of others have been buried so deeply that we will never find them? And if the experiment is real, perhaps that is the point. Failed trials are not displayed, they are cleared away. A scientist does not keep every flawed sample. They reset, adjust variables, and try again. Maybe humanity is not the first attempt at conscious life, but simply the most recent. And here comes the mini-climax. This thought transforms the way we see extinction itself. The dinosaurs, once rulers of Earth, gone in an instant. Entire branches of life cut short by asteroids, volcanoes, ice. Was it only chance, or were those resets? Was Earth being prepared stage by stage until the right conditions appeared for a species like ours? Fragile, yet reflective, violent, yet imaginative? If others came before us and failed, what does that mean for us now? Are we repeating patterns we cannot see? Greed, conflict, blindness to limits, patterns that led to collapse before? Or are we the first to recognize the test for what it is, and therefore the first with a chance to pass it? The ruins we do see of cities, temples, kingdoms may be only the visible edge of a much older story, a story of trials run again and again until consciousness reached the form we call human. And perhaps one day, if we fail, we too will be erased, our monuments swallowed, our stories forgotten. Just another attempt in a long line of experiments. Throughout Earth's history, life has been interrupted by catastrophe. Entire ages ended not with slow decline, but with sudden collapse. The fossil record is marked by scars, layers of rock that tell of fire, ice, poison, and silence. These are the mass extinctions, moments when most of the planet's life vanished in a geological instant. The hook is stark. 5 times already, the Earth has been nearly emptied. The Permian extinction erased 90% of all species. The Cretaceous extinction ended the reign of the dinosaurs. Between and beyond these, oceans turned toxic, skies darkened, and ecosystems unraveled. And yet, after each collapse, life returned. Not the same life, but new, reshaped, more complex. Here lies the conflict. If life is random, mass extinctions are simply accidents of nature. Asteroids striking from the void, volcanoes reshaping the air, shifts in climate beyond the capacity of species to endure. But if life is an experiment, extinctions take on another meaning. They look less like accidents and more like resets, ecological reboots, clearing the slate so the test can begin again under new conditions. Think of a scientist ending a trial when results are no longer useful, then starting again with new variables. A world dominated by reptiles reset to give mammals a chance. A planet filled with one set of ecosystems erased so another could rise. Each extinction a wipe of the board, a new attempt to see what emerges when the rules are the same, but the players are different. And here comes the mini-climax. What if these extinctions are not failures of life, but essential steps in the experiment? Each collapse forcing evolution to try again. Each recovery producing species more adaptable, more aware, more capable of complexity. In that sense, the devastation itself may be the design. Destruction as a tool for progress. This idea unsettles because it reframes disaster as intention. The asteroid that ended the dinosaurs was not just a rock. It was the moment that cleared the stage for us. And if extinction has served as reset before, could it serve as reset again? Could humanity itself, with all our cities and machines, one day be swept away, making room for another species, another trial, another chance at the experiment? When you sit with that thought, the silence of fossils takes on a new voice. It does not whisper only of loss. It whispers of cycles, trials, failures, resets, and restarts. And it reminds us that even now, the test may not be about our survival forever, but about what comes next when we are gone. If life is an experiment, then the question that shadows every part of it is simple. What is the purpose? What is being measured, and why? Is there a final goal? Or is it nothing more than an endless cycle of data, gathered without destination? The hook is direct. Every experiment is designed for a reason. A scientist does not set variables, build systems, and observe results without a question to answer. But when we look at life, the purpose is hidden. Are we being tested for morality, for survival, for creativity? Or is the test not about us at all, but about life as a phenomenon, a universal process studied wherever it appears? Here lies the conflict. If there is a goal, then our struggles carry meaning beyond themselves. Every act of kindness, every failure, every invention could be part of a plan leading somewhere, a grand design unfolding toward an end we cannot see. But if there is no goal, then the experiment feels endless, like a wheel spinning not to reach a destination, but simply to turn. Data for data's sake, observation without conclusion. Some possibilities suggest themselves. Perhaps the purpose is to see whether intelligence leads to wisdom, or whether it always collapses into self-destruction. Perhaps the purpose is to test whether beings bound by time and pain can create meaning anyway. Perhaps the purpose is not about individuals, but about patterns, how societies rise and fall, how civilizations handle power, how species face extinction. And here comes the mini-climax. What if the purpose is hidden precisely because revealing it would change the results? Imagine if we knew what the test was for. Wouldn't we alter our behavior, striving to pass rather than simply live? Perhaps the secrecy is essential. Perhaps the experiment can only work if the subjects do not know the question, only the conditions, only the struggle, only the weight of choices made without certainty. This thought leaves us in tension. On one side, hope, that our suffering and triumphs are not wasted, that they are moving toward something beyond our sight. On the other, unease, that we may be spinning inside an endless cycle, providing data that will never reach a conclusion. Both possibilities are difficult to accept. Both change how we see our lives. And perhaps that is the point. The purpose may not be something we can name or prove. It may be enough to recognize that we are part of something larger, whether it has an end or not. Because the question itself transforms how we walk through life. And maybe that transformation is the purpose all along. If life is an experiment, then the greatest change may not be in the universe itself, but in how we see our own lives. The hypothesis does not simply answer a question. It shifts perception. It changes the meaning of everyday moments, transforming what once felt ordinary into something layered with possibility. The hook is simple but profound. Imagine waking tomorrow and holding, even for a second, the thought that every detail of your day might matter beyond what you see. The way you greet a stranger, the patience you show in a moment of frustration, the silence you keep when tempted to anger. If the experiment is real, then nothing is small. Every choice becomes part of the record. Here lies the conflict. Most of the time, life feels fragmented and chaotic. We rush through tasks, lose ourselves in routine, struggle with problems that feel endless and meaningless. It is easy to believe that nothing matters, that the universe is indifferent. But if life is being observed, then even the smallest gesture may carry weight. The act of helping a neighbor, the decision to forgive, the courage to keep going, these become more than personal victories. They become data, signals, answers to a question too large for us to see. And here comes the mini-climax. What if believing in the experiment changes the experiment itself? When you live as though your actions matter, your actions do matter. You notice more. You act with greater care. You resist despair, not because you are sure of an outcome, but because you sense that everything is being measured. In this way, the very belief may be part of the design, nudging us toward awareness, reflection, responsibility. This perspective alters even the most ordinary experiences. A meal with family becomes more than food. It is proof of connection. A walk through nature becomes more than leisure. It is participation in the balance of the planet. Even a solitude changes, no longer empty, but full of the possibility that you are seen, your thoughts recorded, your resilience measured, and perhaps this is the quietest but deepest effect of the hypothesis. It does not demand proof. It does not require certainty. It simply asks, how would you live if life were a test? Would you treat others differently? Would you hold yourself to a higher standard? Would you find meaning in places you once overlooked? Whether or not the experiment is real, the question lingers. And maybe, just maybe, the way it changes us is already part of the answer. If life is an experiment, then we arrive now at the final question. What are we supposed to do with this thought? We have traced coincidences, suffering, civilizations, and even the possibility of simulation. We have asked whether we are watched by gods, aliens, or ourselves. We have wondered whether the test has a purpose or whether it simply continues without end. And yet, after all the questions, no clear answer arrives. The hook of the finale is this. Maybe the lack of certainty is itself the design. Maybe the experiment was never meant to provide us with proof, but only with possibility, because possibility changes how we live. It forces us to hold life more carefully, to see meaning where we once saw emptiness, to act as though every choice matters, even when we cannot be sure. Here lies the final conflict. If we demand certainty, life frustrates us. No sign comes from the sky, no voice from beyond explains the rules. But if we accept uncertainty, then every moment becomes alive with potential. The smile of a stranger, the weight of grief, the shiver of déjà vu, all can be read as questions, waiting for our response. We do not need the observers to confirm the test. Living as though it exists is enough to transform everything. And here comes the final mini-climax. Maybe the point of the experiment is not the result, but the awareness it awakens in us. By asking if life is observed, we begin to observe ourselves. By imagining that choices matter, we begin to make them matter. The experiment may not be outside us, imposed from beyond. It may be inside us, unfolding through the way we live each day. So perhaps there is no pass or fail. Perhaps the test is not about judgment, but about growth. Not about being measured, but about becoming aware. And in that sense, we do not need to know who is watching or why. The very act of asking the question may be the answer, and maybe that's all we need to know.